Good afternoon and welcome back to Fintech Week Tel Aviv 2021. We're on the last leg now, our last couple of sessions before we wrap up for this year. It gives me great pleasure to bring to the stage a panel of experts from the different corners of the globe. We've looked at innovation in the West and in Israel and in the Gulf, and now we're turning our attention to emerging markets, where I think we can certainly learn much about innovation, and it's great to get an insight from. We've got represented on the panel Brazil, Argentina, Ghana, and China. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Manuel, who is moderating this panel, and I very much look forward to hearing. Thank you very much, guys, for joining us, and the stage is yours.
Hello, everybody. Pleasure to be here with you all, and pleasure to be moderating this panel. My name is Shteyn. I am the founder of a Brazilian credit fintech called SuperSim, which means super yes in Portuguese, and following a string of other startups in the Brazilian market. And with me today, I have a number of distinguished panelists, as Johnny said, from China and Argentina and Ghana. And so the way that we're going to do this is that we're going to have a discussion and then leave a few minutes for Q&A at the end. I'd like to launch a couple of broad questions for panelists to answer, and then they can I'll turn it over to a number of people, and then we can get into their background and what they see in terms of innovation in their specific markets. The one overriding theme here for emerging markets and innovation therein is, frankly, I'm not sure that there is such a thing as emerging markets. There is a bunch of regional or national markets that I've seen in my experience where innovation and the speed of innovation is actually very different. The way it looks is different, and the results are different. So given the fact that we have people from Argentina, China, and Ghana, I figure we may as well start in alphabetical order. And therefore, I'm going to turn it over to Manuel from Argentina to start. The key questions are, perhaps you introduce yourself, what are the key innovations? Why are they happening? And what are the root causes?
Great. Thank you so much for the invite, and Daniel for the organization. So quick intro on my side, I'm the chief of staff at Ualá. Ualá is a fintech that operates in Argentina and in Mexico. In Argentina, we have around 3 million users, and we have a full ecosystem. We have a core transactional product, then a wealth product, credit, acquiring, so business, and then we have insurance and assistance. So it's a full financial ecosystem. And to your point, I think what is happening in Latin America is similar, as you described, is sort of a regional trend, and is similar to what has happened in other regions, and is happening in other regions as well. What we see from Ualá is Latin America still has around 70 to 80% of transactions that are made in cash. So cash is still king even after this fintech revolution. And most people are either unbanked or underbanked. So what we try to do in the region, and what I see is happening in the region, is sort of financial services companies, and to be honest, to all companies which are in this tech revolution, trying to tackle sort of the basic problems that people face in their day-to-day lives, right? This sort of is a sort of a consequence of years of sort of continuity in certain trends. So in our case, because you asked about the root causes, and in our case, the financial system has sort of seen a continuity of certain incumbents who have sort of ruled the region with limited disruption. And I think tech has enabled, on one side, sort of this disruption, because of the fact that the region is heavily digitalized, as is happening in other regions, and costs are going down with tech, reach is going up with tech, and simplicity and inclusiveness of products is going up, right? So I think this is, and my co-panelists will surely deep dive into the regions, but this is a very exciting moment in the innovation disruption and around the world, and Latin America luckily is not an exception on this.
So thank you, Manuel. I think that's very well said. And just to complement your remarks on the Latin American market, my experience in Brazil has been that it's actually taken a while for innovation to take off, specifically in Brazil. And it's a bit of a hockey stick type situation where it's taken. Actually, the long part of the stick is the one that you start with, and it takes you a long time to get going to build the ecosystem of innovation, because much depends, in my view, much depends on the infrastructure for this innovation to take place. Meaning, there has to be cultural acceptance of the innovation. There has to be market demand. There has to be regulatory permissiveness. There has to be a pool of capital that's available to finance it. And critically, there has to be enough of risk-seeking entrepreneurs that understand the value of equity and have seen a number of exits, so that they're inspired. So you need this ecosystem to build up before things really heat up, and that, I think, is what's happening in Brazil, at least from my perspective. But so let's go on to I think China and Tony. And we would love to get an introduction from him on what he's up to and what he sees in terms of innovation and root causes of it in the Chinese market.
Thanks, Daniel. Hi, everyone. My name is Tony Sun, calling in from China right now. I'm from the blockchain team at Ant Group. So currently, I'm working on a blockchain-based trade finance platform within our technology business unit. And prior to that, I used to lead the Fintech research and strategy effort, and also technology partnership. So maybe I will talk about Ant for a few minutes. For those of us who are not terribly familiar with Ant, Ant Group used to be known as Ant Financial, is the parent company of Alipay. So Alipay is one of the largest mobile payment platform or wallet in the world, and started about 13 to 15 years ago as part of the Taobao e-commerce platform. The platform evolved and besides mobile payments, and started to offer wealth management, insurance, and micro lending services to the Chinese consumers. And in the past 5 years or so, Ant has also launched this enterprise arm, meaning that we have built all these technologies, and now we're starting to commercialize these technologies as either platforms or new business model that's leverage all these technologies and partner with our enterprise partners or clients. Okay, so that's a bit of an introduction of Ant Group. Talking about root causes, I mean, China, compared to many of the Western markets, the financial infrastructure is not mature enough. But interestingly, the banking coverage is not low, right? So most Chinese people have a bank account. So I think that's a major difference between China and other emerging markets from what I've been hearing. So Alipay is also built on top of that banking account coverage, but we did lack the credit cards, wealth management, and security services, insurance. These kind of markets did lag behind the Western markets quite a lot. So that's where it gave players like Alipay the opportunities to offer these services in a digital way. So we had what we call a leapfrog experience. So we went basically, we jumped over the credit card phase directly into mobile payments. So that's sort of where we sort of came from. And we also saw the evolution of fintech in China, because we started with platforms and business model innovation. And now we're moving into that hardcore technology services, and we're selling all these technology services to our incumbent partners. Sometimes they call themselves, competitors of Ant, but really now we're partners. We're empowering these traditional players with our new technology. So there's a bit of an evolution of the trend as well. I think I'll pause here. Anyway.
Well, I think that's very interesting, and definitely, I think it can be said that one of the lessons that China has taught us, if China can be considered as an emerging market, which I rather doubt. In fact, I think China has well and truly emerged into, whether you're happy with it or not, that's a fact. So I'm not sure that should be part of the emerging markets classification. But if there's one thing that the Chinese market has taught us is, I think it's the importance of making sure that fintechs and the regulator are aligned, because sparks fly if that doesn't happen, regardless of the rights or wrongs or of any conceived of any one of the sides. I think it underscores the fact that, again, in LATAM, one of the big positives that I know of in that market is that regulatory risk in many cases is not a risk, it is an advantage. So I think that when looking at the lessons from emerging markets, the regulatory construct, I think, is very important. But given the fact that we're sort of talking about regulation, I think this is a very opportune time to turn our sights to Kwame, who joins us from Nigeria and who just happens to be a regulator. So Kwame, over to you for an introduction and your view on the root causes of innovation in your neck of the woods.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. So actually, I'm from Ghana. Nigerian Ghana, I know. It's fine. And I think it's the same story, actually. If you look at both markets, and it's typical, it's exemplifies what the reality has been for all of us. A bit about my background. So I'm head of Fintech and Innovation at Bank of Ghana, which is the central bank responsible for regulating the mobile money sector. Mobile money has grown quite tremendously in Africa. Ghana, no exception. And in fact, at some points, was, I think, sometime last year and the year before then, was considered the fastest growing mobile money market. The other side of our regulatory ambit is the payment service providers. This includes all the different fintechs that provide different menu of services within the ecosystem. And as an innovation office as well, we're responsible for assisting with the bank's strategic innovation projects that are either internal facing to revamp the bank and its capacity and its ability to serve its long-term value, or to be able to enable the market with some critical interventions, such as we're currently exploring a central bank digital currency. The innovation story is really no different when you look at the underlying elements of it. I think generally the one thing that has been driving all of this for us has been a need to intervene in addressing challenges, pain points for consumers, and solving problems, particularly local problems. I think that has become the basis upon which innovation has sprawled locally. Now, we do have certain things going for us that I think it's helping accelerate the process of innovation and, frankly, digitization more broadly. And it includes the fact that we have a shift in demographics happening here in Ghana. So if you look at the demographic structure in Ghana, the increasingly growing youthful population, who are to a large extent a global youth trend, because largely they are plugged into the same social media platforms, they're in tune with what's happening in the world, they have the same skills, they're gaining skill sets and expertise from different sources, including multinational corporations and the educational institutions. And so you're beginning to see a certain flow of talent back into the continent, but at the same time also a shift where you have a growing population from a youth perspective. And in addition to that, you also have a growing middle class for emerging markets like Ghana that have shifted into early middle income country status. And so when you look at that and couple that with the fact that you also have an interesting enablement happening from two fronts. One, from a user perspective, we're seeing an increasing digital adoption and a technology adoption that is enabling a certain level of digital literacy. So whereas historically we've had challenges with literacy levels, we did have some advantage with numeracy. So even people who could not read could at least deal with numbers. And so they could transact, they could trade, and that typically may have been a problem when it came to certain services, traditional financial services, but the introduction of mobile money, which in itself was to solve a critical problem, that allowed people who were numerate but not necessarily literate be able to also actively participate in the digital financial service ecosystem as consumers. Now, in a market where historically we've had more than 70% of our population being unbanked, it's a huge addressable market from a percentage standpoint. Ghana's not a very big country, it's about 30 million. But then you have markets like Nigeria, you have markets like Cote d'Ivoire, you have markets within the sub-region that are fairly large. And in spite of the fragmentation in national borders and etc., I think overall Africa presents a large demand base, with these same trends that I mentioned being insistent across board. And maybe finally, one other interesting shot in the arm that we're having is from a policy standpoint. I think we've had the opportunity and benefit to learn from other jurisdictions, including Western world and China, and some of the amazing things that are happening, India, where we're seeing the role that policymakers can play in enabling digitization, as well as driving innovation, particularly from our perspective, financial technologies. And so Ghana is one of the first countries that put out a national digital financial service policy. And that was a statement of our intent as to what we want to do with the country from a digital financial service perspective, and some of the supports that we're putting in place to make sure that we can actually make ourselves a hub, but also to really give an opportunity to gain from financial inclusion, to give the opportunity for the youth to also demonstrate their creative talents, all the while creating some gains in economic growth. And so things like national digital financial services policies, the different digitization initiatives that government is undertaking, is basically going to allow us to raise the minimum standards to a certain level, where now you have the key fundamental and foundational infrastructure, such as identity, which has been a big problem for the continent for a very long time. So Ghana, for instance, now has a digital, national digital ID that allows us to now properly have a single source of truth, biometric, 10 fingerprints and 2 irises. So following a bit of the Indian model that allows us to be able to deploy things like eKYC and in a very short time, be able to deliver services across board. And then we've put in place things like interoperability and a national switch that allows a bit more of a fluidity and seamlessness in transactions across platforms, but helps the ecosystem be able to grow and innovate on that. And maybe finally, the most important thing, we also have introduced something like we've introduced a national property addressing system that allows people to, we don't have the ability to wait for a couple of decades to build a proper addressing system, as has been the case traditionally. So we've had to hack that process and innovate around that with a digital property addressing system that allows digital addressing. So those are the kinds of things that are happening.
Given the fact that you mentioned India, I was thinking that this is a very good time to bring in another panel participant here who's just joined us. And I fully agree with many of the points that you made, Kwame, with regards to the drivers being drivers that are really much more macro in nature, such as youth and numeracy and the single source of truth in terms of biometrics and identity validation. And I think many of those things are very aligned between the Ghana experience and the experience in other emerging markets, such as India, which of course is one of the biggest emerging markets of them all. So I'd like to turn it over to Pritam and hear a little bit about Pritam, who he is, what he's up to, and his views on the root causes of innovation in the Indian market, and would basically like to see what that part of the world has to give us.
So thanks, Daniel, and for inviting me here. I'm Pritam. I lead fintech innovation and fintech new business for Anheuser-Busch. Anheuser-Busch is actually one of the largest, world's largest beverages company. We have brands like Budweiser. So many people ask me, what are you guys doing in fintech? That's quite a difficult, not a very difficult question to answer, because we see fintech as a new opportunity, especially post-COVID, and in the SMB, small and medium business credit area, where we have huge presence. Now, coming specific to India, I think Kwame mentioned a couple of points. I think one of the things which we have seen over the years shaping that majority of the population didn't have access to bank accounts. So the informal or the cash economy was significantly bigger than the actual I would say that digital economy that we had, and which led to lot of issues. For example, it was predicted that at one point the cash economy, or I would say the black economy, is almost 3 to 4 times of the digital, or over the economy that is routed to the bank. So I think the largest and the biggest initiative that the government drove was kind of providing a digital identity of every resident in India. And it got integrated with everything. It got integrated with, for example, your bank account, your passport, your driving license. So this identity provided most of the unbanked population with the first thing that they need, which was an identity, because many of them didn't even have an identity. So it was called Aadhaar, and actually, as of now, they have close to around 1.2 billion, means pretty much 95% of the entire population has a digital Aadhaar identity. Now, two things it did. One, the entire benefit distribution system, where the passing the benefits to people from a lower privileged background was a very archaic process in India. But over the last 5 to 6 years, the entire process is transparent. So, for example, if I am a farmer and I am supposed to receive subsidies, there used to be 5 people between the chain, where the government sends the money and then what finally the farmer gets. And the entire chain has now been kind of pretty much reduced to next to zero, and the money gets directly credited to the farmer in terms of the subsidies or any other initiatives or benefits that the government wants to transfer. So this became what you call the backbone of the digital fintech economy in India. And the second was something called the unified payment gateway. So banks in India used to strictly follow the central bank's guidelines in terms of interbank operability, but the biggest challenge was the cost of transaction. The Indian government formed something called the National Payments Council, which created the unified payment gateway, which allows, for example, 1 cent, 2 cent worth of payments to be processed. Even if you don't have a bank account, you can do through a lot of NBS in an across system. So this entire ecosystem was primarily what we call UPI in India. Was primarily the backbone of the digital fintech ecosystem here. Now, the entire ecosystem, also, although owned by a government or owned and regulated by a government authority, we had very clear modular structure with multiple players like Google, Amazon, who operated there, and a lot of Indian companies, and some of Chinese partners also, who created their own apps on top of them, which led to I would say, like, for example, during the lockdown, which is during the COVID, the proportion of cash in the entire GDP has reduced by almost 85 to 90% just because of this backbone, because the entire transaction fees and the entire ecosystem has evolved with anybody with a mobile can now do payments, do transactions, can leverage this ecosystem. So that become a bedrock of how innovation or fintech innovation is being driven. And I think coming specifically to like what we are trends that we are seeing in India, that with UPI, which is the national bedrock, and Aadhaar, which is primarily the digital identity for every citizen, lot of fintech opportunities are building on it. For example, the entire KYC process for banks and financial institution has now gone digital. The credit lending process is again has become completely digitized again using the same framework. And I think first week of April we was kind of a milestone year, a milestone month for the fintech community here, because they had 10 unicorns which were identified, which were kind of which came in just that 1 week. All of them were for fintech industry, primarily from different areas like wealth management, credit, microfinance, and alternative investing approaches. So I think to summarize, the government policy and allowing an open API and modular ecosystem helped in great way to accelerate innovation here.
So Pritam, thank you very much for that quite thorough overview, given the fact that we haven't had much time to speak on it. And it's interesting with regards to the points that you mentioned on the digitalization of the KYC process and the lending process, because this is what we do at SuperSim in Brazil. And I think that digitalization, I think, is great. I think it's a very necessary precondition to see evolution in the fintech space. But a lot of the time you wind up with, but I think it's not sufficient in and of itself. And my view in our view at SuperSim is that this creates, this opens up the game, but then you really need to start innovating to add something on top of the fact that the process simply becomes digital. So for instance, just as an example, at SuperSim, what we've done is we've developed a way to collateralize cell phones as collateral for microcredit loans. Now, the point that I'm making here is that once digitalization begins, I think it's very interesting to see how evolution takes over and innovation takes over, and then goes beyond the digitalization aspect to create something that hasn't been seen before necessarily in other markets. So that brings me to the next topic in the time that we have left. I'd like to ask everybody to gaze hard in their crystal balls and to give us a best guess on one or two things that innovation is likely to bring over the next 12 to 24 months in their respective markets. So again, I think I'd like to go over to Argentina for that, given the fact that Argentina starts with an A, and turn it over to Manuel to gaze into his crystal ball and give us a best guess or two as to the future.
Great. Sorry, I turned on my camera. I think I have some issues with my connection. Let me just quickly answer that. I think two things that will happen in the region, and which we've seen happening in more developed regions and in other regions as well. One is open banking disruption. I think the region has the regulatory context to sort of enable this. We've seen regulation in Mexico and in Brazil in this direction. And other countries are already thinking about this. And this will, I think, greatly sort of accelerate disruption in the financial system in Latin America. And the other thing is, and some countries are more advanced on this, but is interoperability in the banking system. We've seen Argentina with the CVU standard. We've seen Brazil with PIX. We've seen Mexico with Espe and Cody. I think this is something that will spread again throughout the region and will also be key to sort of expand the digital footprint in the financial system. And we're very much looking forward to this at Ualá.
Thank you, Manuel. Those are great points. I think real-time funding and ease of payments via a centralized network that works well from a consumer's perspective and that is reasonably friction-free, secure, and low cost is absolutely essential to drive mass volume. And again, I think that let's move on to China and Tony to give us his view from his crystal ball.
Yes, Daniel. So a couple of things. One, in China, I think on the consumer side, I think people have done pretty well before. With Alipay, we have a billion users. Other big platforms, have billion, close to billion, hundreds of million users. So that consumer side of penetration is already pretty high, and most people are mobile and digital already in terms of the consumer fintech. So the next trend we see is going into the industrial side or enterprise side of fintech. So we are heavily investing in ways to do trade finance, to do supply chain finance, business lending. These are the areas that we are sort of investing in, focusing on right now. Right? So I think that's probably number one. Number two is from all fronts of society, right? Whether you're talking about government, regulators, players like us, and incumbents, we are all investing in ABCD technologies, right? So the AI, the big data, the cloud computing, blockchain, you name it. All these are really coming together to make the fintech really technology driven, right? So I think that's probably the second big trend we see.
Well, thank you very much, Tony. That's very insightful. You're absolutely right that when we talk about fintech, we sometimes we lose track of the fact that fintech services can happen on an individual consumer level, but likewise they can happen from the point of view of deep economy and businesses and corporates and of course trade finance, which is one of the biggest areas of the economy that nobody thinks about because it's just buried behind things. And of course that's very important given the amount of export-import business that China has with the rest of the world. So thanks for that insight, Tony. That's actually very interesting. So next, I'd like to go to Kwame and ask him to gaze to dust off his crystal ball and tell us what he sees in the near to medium-term future for the for that part of Africa that he operates in. And again, I don't like to talk about the African market because I don't think there is one. I think there is a number of regional markets within Africa, and Ghana is definitely one of the bigger players in one specific regional area of Africa. But again, given the fact that there's some resemblances between Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire, for instance, again, it would be great to get his perspective on what he sees in his region.
Thank you very much. So first, I think the one thing that we see happening is going to be in the area of cross-border payments. I think as it stands today, traditional payments infrastructure allows that. But as we've been innovating from a fintech perspective, there have been several challenges in figuring out that. And being 51 plus countries and the complexities of doing this, I think a frictionless cross-border transactions at the retail level that enables trade and e-commerce is going to be the order of the day. The second thing that we see coming is the heavy reliance on AI and blockchain to disrupt areas such as traditional banking. So it's interesting that open banking was mentioned. We believe strongly we're likely to see that happening possibly soon, largely because of the dynamics on the markets and everything else that is beginning to enable it, and the posture of different regulators, not just in Ghana, but across the region. So these are two major things that would happen. But also, I think through that process, we should see a couple of unicorns, indigenous companies that would rise and be strong enough. We've seen some recent activities, and they've risen to the valuations of $1 billion more. So I think we should see a few more of that happen on, within the sub-region at least. So that's what I think I see in the crystal ball. Thank you.
Kwame, thank you very much. Again, those are interesting trends that do play out in other jurisdictions as well. It's having been in the Brazilian fintech space for over 9 years now, what I've seen is that it starts slow and then it takes a long time to accelerate because of the various inefficiencies in the market relative to more developed markets. But then when it does start, it goes fast. And that's what I meant by the Canadian hockey stick analogy. I think once you, for instance, in the Brazilian case, there were only a few unicorns. There was 99 and Nubank, but then after a few years of further additional work in the seeding of the ecosystem by experienced entrepreneurs who've had some liquidity, then they sort of cross-pollinate across many other startups, and then the number of bigger rounds and unicorns just begins to take off very rapidly. And I think that given the fact that some pockets of sub-Saharan Africa haven't necessarily seen a lot of that dynamic, I fully agree with you that it will happen. And when it happens, I think it's going to happen a little bit faster than most observers would probably guess. But given that we were graciously given a few extra minutes to continue this panel by the organizer of this conference, Johnny Paul. So thanks, Johnny. I guess we're going to now benefit from Pritam's view as to the crystal ball in the South Asian market, and specifically in India, what he thinks is likely to be a few items of innovation in his market, and then we can have a couple of minutes of Q&A.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. I think, in India, as I mentioned, I think from the small and medium, the SMB banking, and is an area that's going to be going pretty big. We are seeing a significant demand in that space, because SMB banking over the years has been very largely like part of larger banking institutions, and now there are a lot of fintechs entering that space. So I personally see a huge opportunity of growth there. I think automated or robo-based automated advisory services or robo-based advisory services, especially for millennials, would be another growth area, especially from the B2C spectrum, primarily because, as India or countries in Southeast Asia has more young population who primarily are just, getting their first accounts opened in the trading markets, they see a big opportunity to kind of make it big. For example, during COVID, close to around 100 million new trading accounts were opened in India by the trading operators, and primarily most of the users were below 25 years of age. And I think that trend we are seeing across Southeast Asia also. So I think investment advisory for millennials, helping them invest in alternative investment options, and SMB finance, primarily being driven by fintech, are gonna be two big areas. I think Tony from Ant mentioned about the supply chain finance and trade finance are the two areas they are investing in. I'm seeing also similar investment coming across Southeast Asia and India, also from large financial institution, and I also see that being a significant area of investment going forward.
Well, thank you very much, Pritam. So those are, again, probably trends that are likely to play out well. and probably given with some additional maturity in the market, we're probably going to go back and see them as well in the number of the sub-Saharan markets, for instance, in the Kwame's neck of the woods. I think that's definitely something that does need to take place in many different emerging market pockets. So given the fact that we've now sort of covered a historical view of innovation as well as the potential future manifestations of innovation in the various markets across Latin America, Southeast Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, it would be interesting to take some questions from the audience. And I think we do have a question here from an Israeli who's trying to be diplomatic in his own words. And the question is that I think Tony is very well positioned to answer. What is the impact on blockchain growth in China, given the evolving regulation landscape? Tony, if you wouldn't mind addressing that.
Sure, of course. I think when we talk about blockchain, there are actually two things that we mean, right? One is the blockchain technology itself. The other one is more related to crypto, right, like Bitcoin and the others. So in the first regard, the blockchain technology, the Chinese regulation, the regulators and also the other government agencies are actually very much encouraging the development of the technology. And in fact, the Chinese government is one of the largest buyers of blockchain technologies and services. Right, and quite a few of the platforms that we've built at Ant are with the government or for the government. Right? So I think in that regard, the Chinese government is encouraging and investing in the blockchain technology and the growth of the market. But if we talk about the crypto, right, things related to that, the Chinese regulators have a pretty hard stance on that. So banning all activities related to crypto trading or issuing within China. But China is not alone, right, in that regard, in terms of regulation, regulating the crypto world. So it really depends on which way you look at blockchain.
Okay, well, that's a very interesting answer, very insightful. I think it kind of echoes some of the things that Kwame has, some of the points that Kwame has made, which is the regulation behind is very much on the side of blockchain, and therefore the government is on the side of blockchain as an added level of efficiency as an added efficiency agent in the overall financial economy. So I think that those are trends that are frankly quite unstoppable in most jurisdictions. So blockchain technology itself will definitely continue to grow very, very well. I think the interesting question here is who will be the dominant players implementing that technology, which of course still remains to be decided. But the technology itself does seem to have a very bright future in pretty much any emerging market or non-emerging market that you can think of. So again, I think that we actually do have, I think, another, no, I think that we don't actually have any other questions for the panel. I'm wondering if, Johnny, I can turn it back over to you for closing remarks.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Daniel. That was an incredible panel. Thank you for moderating that. And I am really humbled by all of you joining us from all corners of the globe. And we've negotiated so many time zones here. We've got Tony in China, Kwame in Ghana, Pritam in India, Manuel in Argentina, and Daniel in Brazil. It's incredible to have you here and to learn. We don't hear much, certainly in the West, of we don't hear enough, I should say, about innovation and disruption in the emerging markets. And it's so great to have your insights, and really, really appreciate you sharing your thoughts with us today. I hope we can meet in person next year, and you'll all come to Tel Aviv, and we can do this again, replicate this panel again. If the audience can please show their appreciation for this panel, we'll have an emoji button at the bottom. If you can give them a virtual round of applause, because I think this was a superb panel, one of the highlights for sure. So thank you very much again. We're going to have to get the next session on stage, so we're going to have to make a sharp exit. Thank you again, and next year in Tel Aviv. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.